So yeah, January 28th, 1986, Space Shuttle Challenger blew up, and killed the astronauts. The what ended up being the quote smoking gun was the O-rings on the solid rocket boosters failed. And I've been asked many times to come speak to colleges and the people your age and stuff and explain how management failed and it was a horrible decision and all that. And there's documentaries on Netflix now that are completely wrong. I was at the launch pad when Challenger happened. That was horrible to watch, obviously.
The Tom Screen podcast is owned and made possible by Ethical Marketing Service. If your business is struggling with Google or Facebook ads, maybe you're frustrated figuring it out or there's a performance issue, Ethical Marketing Service has worked on hundreds of accounts and we can help in this area. We offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you would like to find out if we can help, it's a free, no salesy consultation call and the link is in the description. Enjoy the episode. Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the episode today, we have Mark Fox. Mark, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
It is my pleasure. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, what I'm working on now is I am the founder of Resona Health and the inventor of Vibe. It's a pocket PEMF or PEMF device, so it puts out magnetic fields. It's a therapy device, so we've got like 55 different protocols on the device. It's PTSD, anxiety, depression, sleep, pain, and a lot of other things. And you simply just take the device, you pick the one that you want, and then you hit play and put it in your pocket. And that's pretty much it. And you do it 3 to 4 times a week. And we've seen some miraculous results, especially with PTSD and trauma.
Okay, well, thank you for the introduction. And I would also say kudos for, let's say, building something and putting it out into the world. That I think that not enough people do that sort of thing. And it reminds me a little bit of, I think Elon Musk said something along the lines of, if people don't build the stuff, then there isn't any stuff, something along those lines. So yeah, congratulations on producing something and putting it out into the world.
One comment Steve Jobs made, and it really kind of stuck with me. He goes, here's the secret to this all. He goes, look around you and just look at all the stuff that humans have invented. And then you need to realize that person that made that thing isn't any smarter than you. They just decided to do it, right? To bring it into the world. So I started off super naively thinking, oh, I'll just take a little coil. I'm not an electrical engineer, but I'm granting myself an electrical engineering degree after this journey because I just said, take a simple coil on a printed circuit board with a Bluetooth chip and a battery, and it should be easy. Well, I mean, there's a pile of stuff catching on fire. 4 different engineers can't make it work. The little bitty coils and stuff should be easy, but they weren't. I mean, I had an 8-foot pile of coils over here before my wife made me throw them away of just testing stuff to try to get it to work right? Because I was trying to combine a bunch of things, which is put out enough magnetic strength to be therapeutic. It can't weigh much because this thing only weighs 2.5 ounces because if you wear it with a lanyard around your neck, it's heavy on your neck. And then the battery, I can make the battery last 20 hours, but then it's going to be the size of a football, right? So it's had a 4 or 5 hour battery on it. So it was balancing all of those things was hard. It's what it is it's actually it's an MP3 player. And what I figured out to do is to take the frequency protocols, and I used a music synthesizer, and I can't play any music, unfortunately, but I use a music synthesizer to create an MP3. So the protocols are actually MP3s playing through a coil instead of a speaker. So if I was to yank the coil out and just plug a speaker in, you would hear it. You would hear the frequencies. But that's what it is. It's running MP3 files. And so that's the thing that's novel, I think, about the device. I figured out a way to do it that way. But I mean, I'm a rocket scientist. I didn't believe any of this stuff 20 years ago. It's complete voodoo, but I've been digging into it and doing my own research, and I've been certified in a lot of the training for this stuff. So there's enough data out there now, and magnetic therapy has been around since 3000 BC, right? So it's not, that part's not new, but the protocols and pulse electromagnetic field research has only been around for about 40 years. So it is kind of new, and it's not complete magic because this pulse electromagnetic field, you're engulfed in it right now. The Earth puts out 3 different bands, 7.83, 14.1, and 20.3 hertz. And it's a pulse electromagnetic field, just like this device puts out. I mean, it's very similar. So it's not something totally new. You're engulfed in it, and the human species and all living and non-living things are engulfed in PEMF. So it's not something voodoo and magic, but it's some great results we've had. Like I said, with PTSD, we've had a 93% success rate, which is shocking to me.
Well, congratulations, especially for doing something that is meaningful to people. I did, when I was perhaps looking at your profile and the things that I could speak to you about, I noticed you had a fair number of, let's say, job titles. I've got entrepreneur, rocket scientist, engineer, author, consultant, researcher, hot air balloonist, and aeroplane builder. And it's a good list of titles. Is there any one particular title which you say that's kind of me the most?
Probably the wantrepreneur, right? I mean, not entrepreneur, but wantrepreneur. My wife asked me the other day, how many companies have you started in the last 10 years? I'm like, I don't know. She goes, well, go count them. Well, it's like 12. Okay. So I guess it's a wantrepreneur. This device is the first time that I actually have some margin in the device to market it. All the other things that I've built, the reality is you got to make a lot of noise for people to know about it. And I didn't have enough margin to be profitable. So I had to, I nicknamed my wife Lucy Van Pelt from the Peanuts, that everything should cost a nickel. So when I get these products and stuff, and then I spend $100 on marketing and it doesn't work, I end up killing them, right? So this one hopefully will be successful, but it's Mark Zuckerberg's taking all my money. It's expensive to advertise on Facebook and Google. So, but that's probably the one. To answer your question, Thomas, is I'm always curious, and I'm always trying to learn new things. It's part of my anti-Alzheimer's program, right? Is constantly learn new things and just keep studying stuff. And so, yeah, that part is probably the most thing, is just I'm always curious.
I like that answer. And I would say that, first of all, not many people have creative ideas in the way that you do. And second, of the people that do have those ideas, very few people follow through on them. So I would say the fact that you've attempted to create many different companies and products and everything, I'd say that was a positive thing, even if they don't all come to fruition, because it's 10 times better to actually attempt to do something than not do anything at all. So I would say it's a positive thing.
Yeah, thank you. So the number one reason an idea fails. The number one reason the idea fails is because it never gets started. Right? So people, they talk about it, but they don't do anything. So what I teach creative thinking classes around business and stuff mostly, but it can go into a lot of other things. But the thing I constantly tell people is, how can you fail in 2 weeks? Right? Don't go into the ad, because everyone talks themselves out of this idea. It's going to cost too much. It'll take too long. Right? So just how can you fail in 2 weeks? Knowing you're going to fail. And a lot of the times you don't. But in either case, you move forward, right? You progress the idea and you learn something in 2 weeks. So most people, you can't come up with an excuse why I can't come up with a 2-week experiment. Just go try it. And that's the problem, is most people don't try it. The other comment, I was the keynote speaker at a creative thinking conference. There's about 1,000 people in the audience. And the whole vibe for the day before I got up there was everyone kind of being secret about the little idea that they had, right? I don't want somebody to steal it. My sister is like the worst. If she has an idea at lunch or dinner, and she's like, whisper, don't let anyone hear it. And I told everyone in the audience, I said, look, let's say that every person in this audience stood up and had $1 billion idea. Okay. Let's say that you just picked one of them, and five of you in the audience actually did something with it. Took that same idea and you actually developed it and got it into production on a retail shelf, right? There is no way in the world that those 5 people, the product that's on the shelf, it would look different for every one of those 5 people, even though it came from the original idea, right? You would never ever be able to recognize that came from that original idea, because there's so many iterations and so many changes and customer feedback and the whole process of developing something that by the time you get to the end of it, it'll look completely different. So quit worrying about stealing the little idea as the seed, because it doesn't happen. Even if it does, it's going to be a different product anyway.
Yeah, 100% agree. And often there are, let's say, feedback from the actual customer, which changes it considerably. I'm sure you're already aware of that. But the interesting thing about all the various different job titles I wanted to talk to you about is, first of all, in terms of how it starts, what's your academic, let's say, experience like? What was that like, getting educated in the various different topics that you're educated in?
Well, my undergraduate's in chemical engineering. I have a master's in business as well. But when I grew up with rockets and my dad worked on rockets, I didn't want to be in the rocket industry at all, right? I graduated with a chemical engineering degree in 1983. My best friend was a nuclear physicist, and we were hanging drywall here in Cocoa Beach for $3.50 an hour, because nobody in 1983 was hiring any engineers, right? The economy was terrible. So doing that for about 6 months, not making any money, sweating in Florida, hanging drywall. Somebody said, "Hey, did you put your resume into this new company at Cape Canaveral called Morton Thiokol?" I never heard of them. So I did. And it was one of those, they called me immediately, said, "Come in for an interview." I'm like, "Oh, so I'm all ready for these really complex questions and stuff." And it was the funniest case of malicious compliance I've ever seen. The guy hands me a brochure and he said, "We're Morton Thiokol. We make solid rocket motors, specialty chemicals, and salt, like Morton Salt. It pays $12.14 an hour. You want the job?" I'm like, "Well, what am I going to be doing?" And he opens a manila folder and looks at my resume. He goes, "You're an engineer, right?" "Yeah, chemical engineer." He goes, "I don't know, engineering stuff." Right. And so I go, "When do I start?" And he goes, "Now." I go, "Now?" "Yes, go." So that was how I got that job. And I said, and what it was it was a cost plus contract. So they had 80 slots open for engineers. And this guy was just told, hire whoever they are. We'll fire them later if they suck. Right. So I figured I'd do that for 6 months or a year. And I ended up staying there 16 years, I think. So I did that. Anyone of you listeners that are old enough to remember a zip drive from iOmega, I was in Utah, is where Mort Thiokol was. And it's weird, Thomas, is that most people wouldn't explain it this way. I got promoted pretty fast, and then I got offered a really big promotion after 15 years. And I was like, you know what? If I take that job, I'm in that career for life, because I already saw what everyone else was doing. I'm like, I want to do something different. I liked rockets, but he said rocket scientists are not that creative. Once you get into production program, NASA's very restrictive, especially after Challenger, right? Of changes that you can make and trying to make things better. So I went to iOmega to get into the computer industry, which was way back in 1998. So the internet was just starting. So I got to learn a lot of cool stuff. I was in charge of the websites and customer service. So that was really fun to learn, be at the beginning of the internet and learning all these cool things that you can go do with the internet. But I've done all kinds of weird things. I've sold women's clothing. I actually own 5% of a women's clothing company still, theoretically. But it's weird, because rockets or computer drives or women's clothing, the fundamentals for marketing and business operation, they're the same. I mean, you walk in, it's the same broken things that are pretty obvious to somebody that's not inside the bottle. Because you're inside the bottle, you can't read the label from the inside. But it's pretty obvious when you walk in, you go, "Oh, the reason you don't have inventory for these clothes is because you have no inventory system," right? you have ladies coming in taking the clothes to go to trunk shows, and you have no input output to know how many pairs of pants they took, right? So just basic blocking and tackling stuff like that I run into all the time. Thomas, when I first got to customer service in IMEGA, this is the old days, our phone bill for people calling, I didn't know what a call center was at the time. I was like, what's a call center? People call in and stuff's broken, they need help. Their phone bill was $33 million a year. $33 million a year. And I go, what are people calling for? And it got all these answers like, arm waving and a bunch of chaos. I'm like, well, where's the Pareto charts, right? Where's the data that's measuring the top call? What's the number one call? What's the number two call? Well, they hadn't collected any data. They're just a bunch of opinions. So it's like, all right. So we start collecting data. The number one call was, mine doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? So back in the day, you had a power cord that it plugged in, and you had a printer cord. It had two cords to make it work. But the printer cord was inside a box separator. And the average person, right, they got a blow dryer or a toaster, they plug it in. So we just put a red hand on the box that says, stop, there's two cords, plug them both in. I think that saved like $8 million in phone bill. So it's just, simple things like that I keep running to every time I go into another business or consult with them.
The power of data.
Yes.
Very cool. One of the topics which you speak about and that I was interested in asking you about was the Space Shuttle Challenger. Now, I apologize. I am fairly ignorant on this particular topic. And now it may be the case that it's because I was one when it was all happening. But it is possible that I also don't have a good grasp on history. So for those who are in the same position as me, would you tell the story on what happened there?
3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
So, January 28th, 1986, Space Shuttle Challenger blew up and, killed the astronauts. What ended up being the quote smoking gun was the O-rings on the solid rocket boosters failed. So, and I've been asked many times to come speak to colleges and the people your age and stuff and explain how management failed and it was a horrible decision and all that. So the O-rings did fail, but everything, and there's documentaries on Netflix now that are completely wrong. Okay. The O-rings did fail, but it wasn't like horrible management. Okay. It's a rocket. So on every launch of any rocket, I'm sure Elon runs this every day. There's going to be engineers say, don't launch, right? Because it's dangerous, right? There's 6 million pounds of energy that you're trying to manage. So what happened on Challenger is everyone blamed the O-rings. The O-rings did fail, but they fail because the external tank that has liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen in it, just 253 below zero and 423 Fahrenheit below zero, it was leaking, and it leaked on a lot of launches. So it basically turned the O-rings into glass. Okay. So on the shuttle, the turbine blades on the main engine, so on the orbiter, so what's called the shuttle itself, has 3 main engines. The turbine blades are about that big around, and they're sitting there at, think about this thermal shock, Thomas. They're sitting there at 80 degrees in Florida or whatever, sitting still. They suddenly spin up to 35,000 RPM. I believe that's the right number. And then they get hit with 250 below and 420 below liquid, right? So the thermal shock is so enormous that it actually changes the crystalline structure of the blades that you can't produce on Earth. You can't manufacture those blades. So to test the actual blade, you have to run it on a test stand with the liquid going through it to change the crystalline structure. So they cracked a lot. So that was on the Pareto chart I just mentioned earlier. The number one risk on the space shuttle at the time was turbine blades. I was at the launch pad when Challenger happened. Everyone standing around me, including myself, went, turbine blade finally failed, right? So that was horrible to watch, obviously.
A national tragedy with the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger approximately a minute and a half after launch from here at the Kennedy Space Center.
So that's what we thought was, and the external tank was the second biggest problem, the leaks. And then the O-rings were a smaller one, right? But what happened is 2.5 years of redesign, and our company got beat up constantly in the press about O-rings and horrible management. And it's not black and white. It came down to The NASA manager, a lot of them don't want to ever be in the limelight, right? So solid rocket motors have never delayed a launch before because they don't. You just press a button, they go, right? The main engine's got to do 100,000 things in the last 3 seconds, and the computer's checking stuff. And if something's not right, it shuts it down. But the launch before Challenger, we did postpone the launch. We being the solid rocket booster, because the ocean waves were too big. Now we had, what happens is the booster falls in the water, it turns vertical, and you have to put a cork in the bottom of it and pump the water out, and then it becomes buoyant and lays sideways, and then you haul it home with a boat, right? But because we, as it bobs up and down in the ocean, try and put this cork in, we hurt very badly a scuba diver, right? So we put in a new criteria. It says if the waves are over, I think it was 8 feet, 7 feet, you couldn't launch. So this NASA manager goes, who came up with that criteria? What is that? That's crazy. It's like, you did, we did. He didn't even remember. And it was like, well, what if we just let the booster sink? It's like, okay, you're the customer, you can do that. That's $20 million. They're $10 million each. He goes, let them sink. So we let them sink. So my theory is some bean counters somewhere filled out a form that went to NASA headquarters that this guy scrapped $20 million of the hardware, but his pay grade only allowed like $5 million, right? So now he's in front of all his bosses explaining why he sunk 2 boosters, right? When he's never had to do that before. So that's in this guy's head. The next launch, we say, we don't want to launch because it's too cold. So he reversed it on us. It was always like, prove it's safe to launch. And then he reversed it and prove it's not. Well, you can't, right? So then the conversation became things like, have you ever flown anything colder? And the answer is yes, 5 or 6 times. And you don't need Richard Feynman, who was on TV showing an O-ring in ice water and how it loses resiliency. Every kid in the world knows a piece of rubber gets cold, it doesn't move as much, right? But the direction of coldness is in the direction of badness for O-rings. But then questions like, is it within specification? Well, it's kind of a trick question because there's no specification for temperature on the O-rings. So there was a lot of those things that went on that were not just black and white. What the news covered, right, was the engineers in my company that, I won't mention his name, but one in particular was constantly on TV going, I told him no. Well, yeah, you told no. You said no on every single launch. Always, right? He's one of those guys. It's like, nope, it's too dangerous. So you can make the shuttle, a rocket like the shuttle, much safer if you have one astronaut in the backpack, right? I don't have to put a lot of payload up there. But if I'm going to put up 5 or 6 astronauts with a school bus size, 50,000 pound satellite, you got to move some energy to put that into space. It's hard to get into space, right? So that's kind of what happened with it. We ended up, and in the background, we were in the forefront. The whole O-ring conversation, the redesign is what everyone knew about. When the main engines and the external tank, we spent $500 million fixing it. The O-rings, the tank guys, Mark Marietta, spent $1 billion. And Rocketdyne, who made the turbine blades, spent $2 billion, but you never heard a word in the news about those 2 companies. So it was kind of interesting because Ronald Reagan was the president at the time, and there was some finger pointing going on a conference call. He said, everybody shut the bleep up. It's the most technical advancement humans have ever built. Fix it. And he hung up. Right? So he's like, okay, president said fix it. What does that mean for budgets? And it became really weird. And so we hired we hired 2,000 engineers, and I was young at the time. And I couldn't hire anyone because middle management was like, this kid doesn't have any rocket science experience. Well, nobody does. They don't have a rocket science degree. So my senior boss just said, Mark, go around them all and just hire people. I'm like, well, they're going to fire me. He goes, he can't fire you. Just go hire people. So it became really weird in that a lot of funding got thrown to fix it, okay, because of the president. And what became weird is suddenly you have a 22-year-old who's now the world's expert in this part of a rocket, right? The O-ring or the rubbers. So, that's kind of freaking the old NASA managers out that were 45 years old, right? They're Guy's up presenting something. You go, who is this kid? Well, he's now the world's expert because he just spent $300,000 testing stuff for 6 months and he knows more than anyone in the world about that thing, right? So that became really a weird phenomena. They had a whole influx of young people doing stuff super, super, super fast. One quick story is a good friend of mine. She goes, hey, I bought a house near you. I'm like, where at? She goes, well, you go to the end of your street, turn left, go 3 blocks, turn right, and I'm the third house to the right. I go, I live on a dead end. She goes, what? I go, I live on a dead end. She goes, no, you don't. I go, yes, I do. And then it dawned on me, I had not seen my house in the daylight for over a year, right? Because we were working 12 hours a day. It's an hour drive back and forth. You're working 6 hours, 12 hours a day. On Sunday, you slept. You might have watched some football for a little bit and then you slept. You never saw so I drove home early that day and it freaked me out because a whole subdivision had been built around my house. Didn't even know it, you know?
Well, thank you for the answer. It does sound a little bit like there is some learnings based on your description of what happened. If you had to summarize it for someone who is either in your position or just looking back, what would you say the lessons are from that story you just told?
Yeah, the lessons are it's still rockets and there's still going to be risk involved. And the astronauts all know that. And that's why Elon Musk, right, is been successful, very successful. He's taken a bunch of risks, right? Is how crazy is that? And if you've never seen it, to your listeners, if you've never seen it in real life, to watch the boosters come back to the launch pad, it's George Jetson looking stuff. It's crazy. But he kept trying to land him on a barge and kept missing, right? Or tip over and explode, right? When he started in rockets, I believe, I might get the number wrong, but the documentary you can see on Netflix is, he goes, we got money for 4 rockets. We don't get it in 4, I'm broke. It's all the money I got. And all 4 of them failed, right? So he called a meeting. Everyone assumes they're getting fired. He walks in and goes, okay, the rockets didn't cost quite as much as I thought they would. So I have enough money for 1 more. And then that one worked, right? So Elon Musk was that far away from nobody knowing his name, right? Nobody really knew his name with PayPal and stuff. But so the thing is, don't get too conservative. There's still going to be failures. If you're not failing, and it's horrible, yes, that we lost lives of astronauts. I understand that. But if you're so conservative that you never fail and you're never going to make any progress, or everyone's going to kick your butt because they're going past you so fast. As an analogy there, right? With my device, I'm running Facebook and Google ads. 90% of them don't work, right? But I have new campaigns twice a week. I'm dreaming up something new. So I keep testing it and trying it. And there's a quote yesterday from a partner of mine. It's hilarious on Facebook. He goes, never underestimate the bad taste of customers. And that every time we show a video or do an ad, the one that's the ugliest or horrible seems to work better. I have a friend who has a business that their best converting ad is a woman explaining the product, holding a baby, and the baby sneezes all over her face, and she's got to wipe snot off her and stuff, right? That's the one that's converting the most. So the lesson learned and it is probably the opposite of maybe what you were probably thinking is, no, keep taking risks and keep doing things or you're not going to progress. And part of what I kind of alluded to was, and part of why I got out of the program, some of the Space Shuttle program, is it got so conservative that you couldn't change anything. One thing that's always bothered me is when somebody says, is it safe? And you go about your whole life, everyone does, like, is it safe to be talking to me right now? Is it safe for you to just take that breath of air you just did? You know it's. So if you look at the definition of safe in the dictionary, it says free from risk and harm or something to that effect. Nothing is free from risk and harm, right? That dinner you ate last night could have killed you, correct? It could have been poison. It could have been bad. You get in your car tomorrow or today and you drive to the grocery store, you could die. There's risk involved, right? So I spent a lot of time when somebody says it's safe, because a journalist asked me that, right? Is it safe to launch? Okay, you can't go, well, there's 22,000 defects on it. which is the right number. And we looked at them all and we have assessed that they're all within reasonable risk. You can't say that. You got to go, yeah, it's safe. So think about that in your career, your life, and your listeners is, what does safe mean? I defined it this way because this is what I think people do. If you say something's safe, it's the perceived, and the word's key, the perceived benefits outweigh the perceived risks. Now think about that, because it's perception on both ends because it's not real. So if you think about a negotiation with somebody in business, think about what are their perceived benefits and their perceived risks. And if you think through that before the conversation, you'll be much more successful in, taking what their perceived risks are and minimizing them and maximizing the benefits. But nothing's free from harm. So when it's interesting when somebody says, is it safe? Do you know what you just asked is? So that's probably one of the things I learned from that I apply to a whole bunch of things. Is it safe for me to do this? Well, using the definition I just used, I'm consciously, or most cases, people are unconsciously using that formula, right? They're saying the perceived benefits outweigh the perceived risks. I'm hungry, right? So the benefit is I want to eat and not be hungry anymore, but I could die. I could die from poisoning or get food poisoning. So the risks are lower, but everyone in the world's probably had food poisoning. It's real. So maybe that's what the best takeaway is. Don't go too extreme when there's failures like that, even though Challenger was horrible and very public, but you can get so conservative you can't make any progress.
Yeah, great point. And I would probably add something a little bit in there about probability as well. I think you're probably right in the sense that journalists maybe haven't thought through that question. I would just say that there are certain things you could do with, for example, food or a car, which was the analogy you used, which make it more probable that something would go wrong. But with rockets, it's quite probable that something will go wrong anyway, right? What would you give as a successful launch in terms of probability?
And it's interesting you ask that, because here's what's weird is the statisticians prior at the beginning of the program estimated, talking in statistical terms, you have reliability numbers and confidence levels in that number. So the reliability was a 0.98, which means 98 out of 100 are going to be successful, 2 are not. Ironically, sadly, of 135 shuttle launches or whatever it was, something like that, we had 2 failures. Okay. So it's interesting you said that, Thomas, because after Challenger, the head of NASA said, I want 5 nines reliability, say 1 in 10,000 failure, with a 95% confidence level. So all the contractors went out and did cost estimates, like what do I have to do for every washer, every part, every piece to meet that? And the cost for a launch was more than the GDP of the country for 10 years. It was trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. That's what they came back and was like, you can't do that. And first of all, it's technically impossible in some areas. I can't hold 1/1,000,000th of an inch tolerance on this piece. I don't have the technology to build that. So that was what got put in your face, was go make this super reliable. And the answer is technically it's impossible. 2, you couldn't afford it anyway. So you got to do something reasonable. But that is kind of weird that the program was designed around 98% confidence and 2 failures and 130 launches or so.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball in this particular instance, because my follow-up is absolutely nothing to do with what we've spoken about so far, okay, or at least for the most part. I don't know if you're aware, but online, at least maybe not really recently, but fairly recently, there has been a social media movement around the concept of the flat Earth theory. Now, I don't pay it much. I don't sort of listen to it very frequently, but I can tell you that there are an awful lot of people who think that there's some sort of truth to it. Now, for the benefit of someone who is actually informed on such a topic, and who has done work with NASA, what do you say to someone who actually believes that this might be a thing, the flat Earth theory?
When I teach creative thinking classes and stuff in business. The first time that happened, when somebody started arguing with me about, well, the Earth's flat, that isn't true, blah, blah. I thought it was kind of a joke, but I learned over 20 years, Thomas, that there's a reasonable percentage of people in every audience that believe that. And when I make a comment now, I can tell by their face reaction which one it is. Right. So, and there's things, last time I checked, the Flat Earth Society, which is a real thing, I think there was 200,000 members that are active members. So, you can't, I mean, you have pictures and stuff, right, from space. Here's the Earth. It shows, and people will just go, that's all photoshopped. It's not real. So you get into these conspiracy theory things and stuff that it's like, I mean, I'll give you one example, because more common than that, than the flat Earth, is how many people don't think we went to the moon. Okay, so I freak some people out. I go, okay, can you prove you were born? Yeah, I'm here. No, you didn't prove you were born. I have a birth certificate. So what? I say that you just appeared and you weren't born. Prove it. Prove I'm wrong. And you can't. So one of my examples, the VAB, the Vertical Assembly Building, the largest building in the world, volume-wise. It's so big, Thomas, it has its own weather report for the inside. You hear what I just said? It could be sunny outside and rain on the inside. It's that big of a building because the clouds and stuff can form on top of it. So they said, I was young, 23 years old or something. They said, we need a volunteer to go clean up. There's so many rooms that have so much junk and stuff in them, right? I'm trying to get ahead in my career. I'm like, I'll do it. I'll be the trash guy. So I went and I surveyed. And this is back with microfiche. We didn't have computers, right? You're trying to, what is this thing? What is this piece of equipment? Thomas, there was so much equipment from Apollo and Gemini and all these programs for ground support equipment, right? I went to NASA and I said, you don't want to put out a contract for somebody to clean this up. You want to reverse it and have somebody bid and pay the government to clean it up, because there's so much copper and aluminum and steel. Somebody could make a ton of money. It took me a year and a half to get that approved, because NASA's like, we give money. We don't take money from it, right? So it took a year and a half to get that approved. I think the winning bid was $6 million. Somebody paid NASA $6 million to clean up the VAB, right? They probably made $30 million, right? In just semis hauling stuff out for 2 years. So if we didn't go to the moon, who had the foresight to build billions and billions of dollars of equipment for me, a 23-year-old kid, to find and clean up 30 years later? So you can't change some people's mind. There's a thing, you said you're only 1 year old, so you're definitely not going to remember this guy, but his name's Rich Hall. He was a comedian in the 1970s and 80s. He had a TV show. He had a thing called sniglets that are awesome. So they are words that don't exist in the dictionary, but they should, right? So he had all these funny words that people would send in. So one of them was bozone, B-O-Z-O-N-E. It's the invisible gas around people that stops new ideas from getting in. Bozo and ozone. So I use that all the time with my device, is get rid of the boson, try it. I know you can argue how it doesn't work. One last comment is I used to teach at Los Alamos National Labs. These are the smartest nuclear physicists in the world. Okay, I'm just a stupid rocket scientist, so they're not going to listen to me. So when I walk in, I don't introduce myself because they're already cocky, right? All of them, they're all cocky in the room. I walk in, all I have is a big chart that shows the history of physics and how every 12 years on average, you're completely wrong, right? So I just look in the audience. Before you get too arrogant and cocky, there's a 80% probability that whatever you did your thesis on is going to be obsolete and wrong in a decade. So keep an open mind, because you can be as cocky as you want, but you're probably wrong, right? And anyone that's your listeners that are following science and discoveries and stuff, we do that every day. We run into something like, how did it do that, right? And I get a lot of times doctors will ask me, what's the mechanism of action? That's the term that they use. I'm like, I can explain to you what I think it is, but I can't prove it. And you don't know how aspirin works. Aspirin's been around for 3,000 years. It used to be called willow bark. Nobody knows how it works. You have theories about signaling and stuff. And then your listeners are smart people. They'll get this. But A lot of the doctors start fighting me this. I go, so when you put a slice of pizza in a microwave oven, how does it heat it? And people go, oh, okay, you asked me that, so it must be a trick question. The microwave energy kind of hits it and it vibrates and it makes kind of friction. Okay. The theory is that a microwave oven energizes a water molecule at its rotational frequency, which means the water molecule is spinning on its own axis. That's the theory. And that spinning on its own axis causes friction, which makes heat. Thomas, nobody in the world ever has taken a photograph or a video of a spinning water molecule. Never had. The technology doesn't exist to do that. But we all heat pizza in microwaves, and it works. So you don't know exactly how it works. So with my device, I make that argument, relief before reason. If it's giving you relief and stuff and it's working, you'll never be able to explain exactly and prove. You can explain, but you'll never be able to prove exactly how something works. One of my favorite ones is a 17-year-old girl told me, Mark, I've never had a date in my life because I have Tourette's, right? Tourette's. No boy's going to ask me out because I'm a monster. I'm a freak. She goes, I ran brain balancing. My Tourette's went away and I have a date Saturday night. Okay? That made me cry when she told me that. This could be a placebo as well, but one of the studies I'm running, getting ready to start on Monday, is glucose, diabetes, and it lower blood sugar. And so I have an insulin resistance protocol. That's hard to fake, that your blood sugar went from 220 to 100. Now, it still could be a placebo, which is fine, because if somebody's suicidal and it helps them, or they have severe anxiety and it goes away, I don't care if it's 100% placebo because they're living their life better.
Well, congratulations for the people that you've helped with what you produced. Do you have any closing thoughts for us today?
Yeah, if people want to learn more about it, because this is not something at a checkout stand you're going to grab like candy or gum. I get that, right? It's so for your listeners, I created a page, Resona, RESONA.health/green, your last name, I think, right? It is green, right?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. Resona.health/green. They can go into the rabbit hole they want. They can look at, what the device does. They can look at all the background, what I mentioned about PubMed. I've written multiple books on it. So you can go learn all that. And if they want to try one, just go to that page. You'll see there's like $150 off. They're $399 $399. They can get it for $249 with a coupon code that's on that page, and try it for 30 days. If it doesn't work for you, send it back.
Well, thank you for that. And thanks for directing people where to go if they want to stay in touch with you. And Mark, thanks for being a great guest today.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great weekend.